to continue the conversations that we feel need to be had, not just as humanists, but as humanists of color, humanists who need to really kind of add the voices to the voices that are already out there, add to the voices across the world we are in a fortunate position to be able to speak freely, whereas there are other places in the world that isn't the case. So we need to be able to kind of correlate all of those voices together. So I'm going to hand over to Clive now, who was going to take over, and then we're going to get things started with Professor Pinn and Lola. So Lola, please be ready. And I'm going to switch off my camera. If you want to send me direct messages of anything, or there's any issues, any questions, please put them in the chat if you want me to, and I'll be monitoring that. Thank you, Clive.
Thank you, Audrey. That's very good of you. And I just want to wish a very warm welcome to our guest of honor, Professor Anthony Pinn, and welcome everyone else to the event. Now, I must say I'm not going to be very original here. I'm just going to tell you a little bit about Professor Pinn before we get started. So Professor Pinn is the Agnes Cullen Arnold Professor of Humanities, a Professor of Religion and Director of the Center for Engaged Research and Collaborative Learning at Rice University. He's the first African-American full professor to hold an endowed chair in the history of Rice University. He's also Director of Research for the Institute for Humanist Studies and a member of the Board of Directors for the American Humanist Association. He's got numerous books, including The End of God Talk, An African-American Humanist Theology, and Writing God's Obituary, How a Good Methodist Became a Better Atheist. And he's got some novels, or a novel called The New Disciples. So without further ado, please give a warm welcome, a round of applause, even if it's a virtual round of applause, to our guest, Anthony Pinn, Professor Anthony Pinn. Thank you. Thank you, Lola. So please take over now.
I feel so privileged and honored to be having to do this with you, Professor Pinn. There was an email that Clive forwarded to me. I said something about you in 2015, and I said, maybe one day, it was a wild dream, and dream can come true. And I hope that maybe one day we will also have you in person. Thank you so much for today. We are really grateful. This book is an easy read, but so complex. It has several layers, and it's been a challenge for me to know where to start. How do I unpack this so that we can do, so that I feel that I can do some justice, even 10% justice to the book, I will be happy. So where I want to start is actually at the end of the book. And there is a reason. So I'm going to read you at the end of the book. I don't labor under the illusion that racial justice will be a priority. Bear with me, my screen is playing up. I don't labor under the illusion that racial justice will be a priority for all humanists. Rather, I'm suggesting that it should be a priority. And for those interested in tackling this issue, I've offered the rough outline of a way forward. Humanists are given opportunity to gain perspective on what matters, to wrestle with the degree to which Black lives matters to humanists. If race matters, as some of the rhetoric I hear within humanist circles suggest, it's time to get serious about addressing issues of racial justice.
Mm-hmm.
I am going to read something, and I was really surprised when I came across it in the book, because it's not just happening in the UK, it's happening in America too. And if it is happening in the UK and happening in America, I can conclude that it's happening in different Western countries. So you say, how do we appeal to racial minorities? It's a self-serving and tired conversation when it doesn't evolve into concrete and sustainable activity that is based on solid information and knowledge of the nature and meaning of racial difference. I have to say that it is a question that we keep hearing and that we keep discussing. I've been a humanist now for about 16 years, and all the time the question comes up. And I was really surprised when I came across it in the book. And then, although the book focuses especially on Black American experiences, but a lot of these experiences are shared experiences by Black people living in different Western countries. And then you ask the question, why would African Americans, and I will rephrase the question, why are Black people, Africans, whose enslavement was justified by Christianity, embrace Christianity? Why hasn't humanism proven a more compelling alternative to theism for African Americans, American Indians, Latinos? But I would say, I want to focus selfishly on Africans. And when I mean Africans on the continent and Africans in diaspora. May I ask you to talk more about this? Why would Africans whose enslavement was justified by Christianity embrace Christianity to this extent?
Mm-hmm. Well, first, let me say hello. It's a delight to be with you all. When circumstances allow, I get to the UK quite often, so perhaps at some point we can chat in person. I would love that. I'm going to answer your question, but first let me give you a sense of why I wrote the book. I wrote the book because I was tired of hearing lazy questions and self-righteous pronouncements. And so it wasn't unusual within the context of humanist and atheist conferences and other gatherings in the United States that I would hear humanists who are supposed to be committed to reason, who are supposed to be committed to logic, who understand themselves to be a group of people who are committed to investigation, information, and facts, who would say the most bizarre things when it came to issues of race and racial justice, whose perspective on issues of anti-Black racism were counterproductive. And I'd also encounter other humanists who understood themselves to be in solidarity with those who suffered due to anti-Black racism, but their stance entailed a kind of missionary impulse. We know what you need, so just be quiet and listen to us. I'd also get a lot of folks over and over again at the end of every talk. I wish I had $1 for each time this came up at the end of of every talk, I would retire, who would ask the question, often disingenuously, so what do you want us to do? What should we do? And so I decided, rather than having to entertain that question at the end of every talk, I would write something down and put the responsibility, the onus on those who claim to have an interest. And so I wrote the book. The question you ask is also a question I get quite often. Why would a group of people who've been oppressed based upon the theological frameworks and the ethical structures of a tradition, why would they embrace it, knowing what it has done to their people? And so you've given one of the answers, and one of the answers involves flipping the question, why hasn't humanism been more attractive? In the context of the United States, one reason it hasn't been more attractive is because white humanists have failed to recognize the ways in which humanism is tied to really poor racial thinking. I've not encountered very many humanists in the United States who don't embrace Thomas Jefferson. Regardless of how Thomas Jefferson may have understood himself, humanists in the United States, by and large, claim him. But what they fail to recognize is, in claiming Thomas Jefferson, they are tying their humanism to racial disregard and sexual violence. Why isn't it more attractive? Because humanism in the United States, and I would assume beyond the United States, has not sufficiently wrestled with its ties to anti-Black racism. Why would Black folks embrace this tradition? It's complex. That it is insufficient and inaccurate to say that Christianity has only bred anti-Black violence and passivity on the part of Blacks. In the context of the United States, you cannot understand the work of figures like Martin Luther King Jr. through that reasoning. You cannot understand the work of an Ida B. Wells who fought against racial violence in the form of lynching and did so through her religious commitment. You cannot understand the work of the 19th and early 20th century African Methodist Episcopal bishop. African Methodism is the oldest Black denomination in the United States. In 1895 in Atlanta, Georgia, if you don't know the geography of the United States, is deep South. In the context of Atlanta, Georgia in 1895, this is after slavery, but it's also after the failure of Reconstruction. It's during a period in the context of the United States when white supremacy is given another opportunity to reinforce itself. In Atlanta, Georgia in 1895, Henry McNeill Turner argues, God is a Negro. This is the same person who argued the US flag is a dirty rag until the United States does right by Black people. That is to say, Black people have embraced Christianity for at least two reasons. One, humanism hasn't been attractive because it has been part of the problem. And secondly, because within the context of Black Christianity, there is also a progressive strand that is concerned with the eradication of Black suffering. Tied to that is the way in which Black churches have provided a soft place to land. Within the context of your country and mine, within the context of these churches, Black people didn't have to explain why they were angry. They could network. Within the context of these churches, you didn't have the curious feeling they had an entitlement to come and touch your hair. Right? It was a space in which they could catch their breath. And humanism, to the extent it hasn't wrestled with its own involvement in anti-Black racism, has not offered a soft place to land. So again, you have Black people remaining in Black churches because it provided a soft place to land, and there are strands of Black Christianity that are about the business of radical transformation. And humanism not having adequately dealt with its own anti-Black racism, did not entail a soft place to land. So you, in your context, you cannot understand a figure like Dr. Robert Beckford by simply arguing that Christianity is all about the mental enslavement of Black people. He's a Pentecostal minister who is all about social transformation and calling out white supremacy, right? So it's a complex story.
Thank you very much. You did say in the book that we need to have this uncomfortable discussion. And I don't know how to say this. I don't know how to say it because it
Just
is
say
about,
it.
Yeah, it is about discomfort. The thing is, oh gosh, this is hard, but I'll say it. Sometimes we, as Black people, we don't want to make people uncomfortable. And we know that people have very good intention. And I don't know if people know that we carry that burden. We carry that burden because we know from our own, I'm going to make it personal. We know that we are amongst good people. But it doesn't mean that we don't recognize certain issues, and we carry this burden because they want to be good and they want to do the best thing and the right thing as well. And then we acknowledge this, we understand this, and we appreciate it. And then it makes it difficult for us sometimes to have this uncomfortable but necessary discussion. And I'm very, very grateful for your book because it's allowed us to say we should have this conversation. If the discomfort and the feeling of helplessness, like what else do you want from us? If that is the worst that someone can suffer, I think we all have to agree that it's nothing. It's not much. It's a little price to pay. And I thank you for pushing us to, encouraging us and pushing all of us together to have this uncomfortable conversation.
Yeah.
What you said something about, the humanist community has not really confronted certain anti-Black, even with all the good intention. You talked about Thomas Jefferson. Can I have your comment on that?
Well, I'd say a couple of things related to that. One, we have to become comfortable with discomfort, that we cannot talk about an interest in social transformation and then say, but you can't make me uncomfortable. To demand comfort is also to demand the status quo. These conversations ought to render us uncomfortable. That is the point, because it's at that moment of discomfort that we are positioned to think new thoughts and engage the world in different ways. Our assumptions are made visible and they're confronted. That's a good thing. I'd also say that in terms of intent, I'm much more interested in what is done than what is said. Right? And so for me, within the context of humanist community, I'd rather gauge the activity of my colleagues and determine their agenda and their commitments than to simply base it upon their rhetoric. What are you doing to make a difference? What are you doing to make a difference? And for a community that is so very concerned with, with information, with tackling resources, with knowledge, folks cannot convince me they are about the business of social transformation when they are unwilling to learn something about the communities they say they want to help. At best, that's just lazy. To want to do something to address anti-Black racism requires learning something about the communities that are under attack. And it is insufficient, deeply insufficient, to simply turn to members of those communities and say, okay, tell me something. No, do your work. Do your homework. The first act of solidarity is the securing of information. If you don't secure information concerning the communities you say you want to help, there's no way in the world that your moral and ethical compass can be pointed in the correct direction. There's no way that your activities can be mindful of the very needs of the community you say you want to help. If you say you are in solidarity, learn something, do something. I'm also one who believes that there is theological residue in much of our humanism. And by that, I mean, we are so deeply committed to outcome-driven strategies. Now, it makes sense to me that theists are committed to outcome-driven strategies because they work under the assumption that there's a cosmic force laboring with them on their behalf. So you can get a Martin Luther King Jr. arguing the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. Why? Because he assumes they don't labor alone. There's a cosmic force working on their behalf. That is not for us. We recognize humans as accountable and responsible for the conditions of life. So outcome-driven strategies, from my vantage point, are not helpful strategies. I'm much more in line with the thinking of someone like Albert Camus and his take on Sisyphus, right? Perhaps you're familiar with that myth. Sisyphus is being punished by the gods for perceived wrongdoing. And this punishment involves him having to push this rock up a hill only to have it come back down. And his eternal obligation is to maintain that labor. But Albert Camus argues that there reaches a point when Camus is at the top and the rock is beginning to descend, where he reaches lucidity, full awareness of his circumstances, and he refused to be conquered by those circumstances. What Albert Camus suggests in terms of an ethical vantage point isn't outcome driven. It's a recognition that our struggle against injustice is perpetual. We continue to struggle against injustice. So why do we do this work? Not because we assume we will win, but because this is what we can do, and we're obligated to do what we can do. We struggle against injustice, mindful of the moment, doing what we can, and it may be the case that the best we can accomplish is a persistent and loud no to injustice that has to be repeated over and over and over and over again.
Thank you. Thank you for, encouraging us not to give up, because it can be overwhelming and sometimes you just want to leave, but then it doesn't go away. And thank you for reminding us and then giving us that courage, and that courage to be in that very, very uncomfortable place. And the hope of being in that uncomfortable place is ultimately to work together. Humanity is work in progress, to work together to the promised land, using the religious language, the promised land of equality. One of the things my colleague Audrey, she says, humanist community in the West is so elites, and they go after the big things. Lately, climate change, these things are very important. A lot of energy is put on LGBT issues. A lot of energy is put into abortion issues and big issues. And all these things are necessary. But then when it comes to ethnic minorities, yes, we'll still have, we have minority within minority that, have to, we have LGBT among us, that, LGBT humanists, and all these issues have to be addressed. But somehow we have to give this example when George Floyd thing happened, and there was an uproar around the world, and people were protesting around the world. We realized it, and this is something that we are coming out. I'm just coming out. We are coming out big time, because we tend to be, quiet about certain things. So this is a big coming out for us as Association of Black Humanists. We felt it, and we asked ourselves that question: what is Humanists UK doing about this? Humanists UK was quiet for about a month or 6 weeks until it became popular. I'm afraid Humanists UK waited until it became popular to do anything or say anything about Black Lives Matter.
Yeah, let me say a couple of things. I've been trying to follow the chat as well. It seems to me one of the things we have to come to grips with is in terms of the capitalist system, there is no outside, right? We are all involved in this. I have an iPhone. Who mined the materials necessary for my iPhone? Who put this thing together? I have Levi's. Who made those jeans? Who made your shirt? Who made many of the items stored without much thought or consideration in your flat? Right? There are ways in which we are all within the context of this system, both suffering as a consequence of it, but benefiting as well. And it seems to me it's that complexity that we have to learn to maneuver through. And coming to grips with that complexity helps us to recognize that oppression is web-like in nature. There are ways in which we benefit from oppression and ways in which we suffer as a consequence of it. So within the context of the United States, a nation that is decidedly anti-Black, my Blackness results in certain forms of oppression. But I benefit from some of the nastiness of this nation to the extent I am identified as a heterosexual man. So what does it mean to speak for justice and to work for justice within that context of complexity? On one level, it requires a recognition that the advancement of those who suffer most requires me to surrender something. If we're talking about anti-Black racism, the advance of those who suffer most requires a recognition of and a surrender, a troubling of white privilege. If I'm concerned with the ways in which trans folks and homosexuals and lesbians are treated, it requires a recognition of the privilege that comes with my heterosexuality, recognizing that and troubling it. It also seems to me that whether we talk in terms of humanist communities or theistic communities, they share a similar problem, and that is people. Messy, complex people. And so it seems to me we've spent much too much time engaged in critique and not enough time figuring out how to be in solidarity without losing the importance of our differences. I don't think transformation in the context of the USA or the UK can take place simply on the backs of humanists. It will require solidarity, work across communities of difference. And we have not positioned ourselves sufficiently to be able to identify points of shared social concern in ways that don't wipe out our difference. We are so concerned with looking for those points of similarity in a way that wipes out our difference. Humanists and theists don't have to agree theologically in order to recognize they all live in the context of a country in which too many people are suffering. What do we do to work on that? And working on that, solidarity doesn't require a surrendering of our differences. But we've not done that work necessary to mature in terms of our perspective and opinion. We've not done that hard work that will allow us to develop useful forms of solidarity. We just point our fingers. We point our fingers at them, they point their fingers at us, and we call it a day, thinking we've done something. They point their fingers, we point their fingers, and Black people still die. Trans folks are still murdered, right? And it seems to me we've also kind of misunderstood the complexity of our agenda. Science education, separation of church and state, two of the main points of conversation within the United States in humanist and atheist circles. Those are important. But separation of church and state wouldn't have kept George Floyd alive. Mm-hmm. Science education would not have kept George Floyd alive, right? That is to say, our attention to science and our attention to separation of church and state are vital, but in and of themselves insufficient to address issues of social harm. Why? In part because science and scientists exist within the context of cultural worlds. This is how you could end up with the pseudosciences of the 19th century, because scientists and science live within the context of cultural worlds. This is how you could end up with a Richard Dawkins, who is a brilliant scientist, but so very messy and poorly informed when it comes to issues of social life. So our agenda has to expand if we're really concerned with the enhancement of quality of life.
Dice, from what you've said, I want to move into something else, but it's still along the line of what you said. You brought our attention strongly in the book to the fact that there is a difference between theism and religion, and it's as if you are correct me if I'm wrong, but that is what I deduced.
Lola, can I ask you to hold that point for just a second? There was something in the chat I'd like to respond to.
Okay.
I would agree that on the global level, the terminology of minority isn't useful at all. But I'd also say there are other ways in which we name populations that allow whiteness to remain normative. So another phrase that I don't like at all, can't stand this phrase, is people of color. Because the phrase people of color allows whiteness to remain normative, because we're talking about everybody but white people. As if white people are not raced. Everybody is raced. Just certain populations benefit from it and are able to function in ways that allow their raced identity to be invisible. So if we have to use this language, rather than people of color, my preference would be people of a despised color. Because that recognizes all of us have been socially coded. But for some of us, that social coding can be deadly. So I'm sorry, I just wanted to get to that before it moved, before it was kind of lost in the string of really interesting comments.
Yeah, I was very excited when I came to that part of the book about, calling everybody else a people of color. And for people that like to use that, phrase, I don't know where it came from. I don't know whether they appreciate that they have grouped everyone else together as against, it just reinforces that there is a race that is special, that is distinct, and everyone else is people of color. I've never liked it. I find it very offensive, actually. So again, thank you for bringing it up in the book. There is a place I want to go, and I'm going there because you talk in the book about the difference between theism and religion, and it's as if, correct me if I'm wrong, I think it's almost as if you are inviting us, you are inviting humanism. If you want to appeal, to minorities, have a different look at religion, especially if you want to appeal to Black people, have a different understanding about Black people and religion. And I will say, I am also guilty of this. I have also, even though I'm guilty of it, but I'm also aware that for Black people, churches, religious settings are beyond theism. It's beyond God. Churches are beyond God for Black people. And so that when we need to be careful about how we turn down our nose at the community, the religious community. And I am, very guilty of this as well. You point out rightly, and you've already touched on it earlier on about churches, religious places being safe place for Black people, for civil rights movement, and to discuss social issues and fight for social issues and equality. And that is something that is missing within the, that coming together of, the way, the structure. And you do say in the book, how so intelligent religion is. And religion is very, very intelligent. Whilst we are discussing big issues, these issues are important. But within churches, and this is the journey of Black people. Within churches, they would discuss variety of issues and bring in music and bring in food and bring in love and bring in warmth and bringing heightened emotional experience. And humanism is so focused on logic and reasoning and all this sophisticated philosophy that we forget the day-to-day journey, the day-to-day human journey. Do you want to talk more about that?
Well, I took a lot of heat early on suggesting that humanism could be understood as a religious orientation. And I took a lot of heat in part because the understanding of religion was much too narrow. That religion is a structure that houses our effort to make life meaningful. It does not require God or gods. Theism requires gods. Religion is simply a structure for housing our effort to make life meaningful. And I am convinced that humanists and atheists, like all other people, are working to make life meaningful. What I was trying to do through that argument was not damage humanism, but get us to wrestle with the human in humanism, and to do that in a way that allowed us to better forge opportunities for mourning with those who have lost and celebrating with those who have gained. That is to say, to forge more complex, rich communities that understood the value of ritual. Right? And I got a lot of heat over ritual. We don't, that's for Christians, that's for Muslims. We don't believe in ritual. Yeah, we do. Think about it. If this organization gathers based upon a regular schedule, and there is a particular process to your gathering, you are participating in a ritual. Because ritual is simply repeated activities in founded space. Doesn't have anything to do with gods or gods. It's humans gathering in ways that are meant to reflect their questions, their concerns, and their quest for meaning. When you gather, you are participating in ritual. But to the extent humanists are unwilling to think about these softer dimensions, we lose a valuable opportunity to forge robust communities that allow us to be fully human, to mourn, to celebrate.
Thank you very much.
We surrender, so it seems to me on one level, we surrender much too much to theists. We surrender things that are unnecessary to give up. The importance of ritual, we don't need to give that up. The importance of embodiment, a recognition that we are embodied bodies moving through time and space, doesn't have to be given up. That you cannot solve all of our problems. You cannot fully understand our orientation by simply thinking it. It is not reason over against the body. It is embodied reason. People of African descent, in part, are targeted because of the bodies they bear in this world. How can we do our work and not recognize the significance, the importance of the bodies we carry through this world?
Now, I want to, this will be my last question, and then we will get the audience involved. And this is about contradiction of what it is to be a human being and what we want. Sometimes, and I would like your thought on this, sometimes I think there is a space where, and I've seen it when I attend like at the big Humanist UK event, and I think there is a space for where we shared, this is a very difficult one for me, but I'll try my best. There are times when and it's not because I'm denying anything, I am obviously, I'm very much so who I am, an African. But there are times when I want my humanity to be more, to be the center. I don't want to be Black. I don't want to be African. I don't even want to be a woman. I just want to, and there are times when I attend Humanist UK event and I'm thinking, is this what they are trying to achieve? I'm trying to give a benefit of the doubt, because there are moments when I just want to be Lola and nothing else, and absorb, and just be with everyone without being, be with, whether it's James or Guy or whoever it is, Audrey, as the person that wakes up in the morning. Because when I go to bed and wake up first thing in the morning, I'm not anything. I'm not African, I'm not Black. It's when I step out that I become all these things. At the same time, this is where I'm talking about contradiction of what do we want sometimes. because I have to ask that question. At the same time, there are times when I just want to be Lola. But then when I'm Lola a lot of times, then I'm thinking, oh, there are many Lola that that is not allowed, that is not coming out, that is being, because you talk about sameness and difference in the book. But we have, and I think we all have that desire when we are all just humans. And then we have, but it is also important to recognize those differences. Do I make sense? It's very difficult for me to
yeah. I mean, you make a lot of sense. I don't know that we agree though, because I think we are already and always coded and understood through these social categories. And so for me, the freedom is this: a recognition that we occupy multiple social spaces simultaneously. Right? I am all these things. I am that complex. I am all these things. And that the problem becomes, from my vantage point, the problem is when societies, nations, etc., try to reduce us to one of those things. We are much more complex than that. The problem, again, is when they try to reify us, to reduce us to one dimension. But I am much more complex than that, right? So you could argue with the philosopher, US philosopher Lewis Gordon, that we are human, of course, but what does that mean? It means we are ambiguous. We are not so easily defined. We are not so easily limited. And I think there are philosophical traditions, and I'm trying to loop in one of the comments in the chat. There are philosophical traditions that already embrace this mode of thinking. In the UK context, I would highlight the late Stuart Hall or Paul Gilroy. In my context, it's Cornel West, Lewis Gordon, and a variety of others who are already thinking in these rather complex ways. They understand philosophy as, to borrow from William James, it has a cash value. That is to say, philosophy has an obligation to say something and do something in relationship to the world and world conditions. I don't think that's a redefining of philosophy. It's a recognition that philosophy has never been defined in just one way.
Thank you very much. I think I have one more. And I think that it's exciting. I want you to tell us, because I read it, I think I understood it, but it keeps slipping out of my, I was trying to grasp it, but it keeps, eluding me in a way. Please tell us about, your hip hop theory.
One more time, please.
You mentioned hip hop. What we can learn from hip hop.
Ah, yes. So here's the thing for me, that humanist organizations with which I've been involved, humanist organizations with which I've been in conversation, are always concerned with how to grow, how to render themselves more relevant. And my argument is, look at organizations, look at movements that are doing precisely what you say you want. And so my argument was, pay attention to hip hop culture. That here you have a culture that develops in the 70s in death-dealing urban context that is despised, right? It is despised. But despite that, it grows into a cultural influence that is global, that is international. It has shaped and transformed how we think about life and how we communicate life. Our grammar and vocabulary of life is indebted to hip hop culture. How did this cultural movement produced by economically challenged and despised Black and brown folks in places like the Bronx, New York, how did it become so international? How did it capture the imagination of the world? It seems to me, if we pay attention to how hip hop has done this, we as humanists, atheists, free thinkers, however you define us, might be able to develop better strategies for our own growth.
Okay.
And so I'll give you an example of one thing that hip hop culture has done. It has developed a grammar and vocabulary for explaining itself and explaining the world that is organic, that grows out of its experience, that grows out of the ways in which folks encounter the world. Its vocabulary and grammar is organic. It speaks to circumstances. It isn't simply borrowed.
Thank you very much. I'm going to hand you over to my colleague Audrey. Before I do, thank you very much, Steve, for your donation. As Audrey said at the beginning, we are self-funding and we do struggle with with funding. We really do need your donation. We've got our account information. Please write it down. We need, we are not going to be shy about this. We need your help. We need your donation. We are, the three of us, a lot of times we are running this organization from our own pocket. And we do so because we are passionate about what we do. So thank you very much. We are looking forward to your donation. Audrey.
Hi there, thank you very much. Some great, I'm just looking at I'm sure you've been following the chat, Professor Pinn. I'm gonna try and go back. If I miss any of your questions, any of your, any questions that you put in the chat, I'm also gonna allow people to just raise a hand. So if you want to ask a direct question, please do so by just using the raised hand reactions. So yeah, we've had, I mean, the reaction, as you probably noticed in the chat, has been really active, and I'm just trying to, every time I try and find a question, the chat moves. So what I'm going to do, Vanessa, I saw you dancing there, Vanessa. You were jumping around as Professor Pinn was talking. So I'm going to let you speak. Have you got a question that you want to? Can I say, can we keep the question short and direct? I'm just going to put that out there, short and direct, so that we're not, you know, going off onto a tangent. So Vanessa, go ahead. I can't hear you. You're very quiet. Have you got your sound on? There's no sound coming from you, Vanessa. No, nothing at all. Not a word. Okay, while Vanessa sorts out her sound, Iware, do you want to turn your camera on? Are you okay with your camera on?
My camera's not working at the moment, but would it be okay to ask the question?
Yeah, sure, go ahead. You want to speak up a little bit? You're a little quiet.
Any better for you, Walter?
Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you for the talk, Dr. Pinn. In trying to understand the subject matter clearer, especially from a humanist perspective, is there a necessity for us to have an understanding of some of the psychological ramifications of what it means to be Black, especially within the West, devoid of theology? The idea I'm thinking of is Lewis Gordon illustrates the work of Fanon as a good example, that as we move away from the theological understanding of existence, Fanon offers us a lens in which to see not only ourselves, but our relationship with that white supremacist use of theology. So I was asking, what's your recommendation on that?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. We need a complex understanding of complex conditions. So Fanon, certainly, but I would add to the list Albert Camus, I would add to the list Richard Wright, I would add to the list right? Cesar, I mean, there are a variety of figures that help us better understand these conditions of life and the ways in which anti-Black racism have informed and influenced not only our understanding of embodiment, but our understanding of the effective fallout of anti-Black racism. So of course.
Okay, I'm going to go to Greg right about now. Greg Shields, do you want to unmute yourself and ask a question?
Thank you very much. I'm sorry I got to this meeting a little late, but enough time to hear what was going on. I think Anthony was speaking then. I'm from the United States, and I'm from the age of the area that was basically popular by people like Malcolm X, Angela Davis, and those individuals around the 65 riots and the race riots here in the United States. And there's a struggle to get more Black people involved in things that are socially needed, I guess. And as such, I've joined this one organization called Atheists United in Los Angeles, and we have a pretty large footprint, but there are no Black folks except me. And I'm reaching out because I know I'm not the only Black person that thinks the way I do.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and there's a lot of us around the planet, and I wanted basically to talk and see what you had to say out of the UK and whoever else is on the call to see exactly where we are. It's getting a little lonely out here.
Yeah. Well, in the LA area, you certainly are not alone. There is a community. Someone I would seek out if I were you is Dr. Sikivu Hutchinson.
Sikivu, I read some of the stuff she's had. Yeah, I read some of the things that she put together. She's very good.
But she's part of a community that I'm certain would welcome you.
Yeah, I will. I'll reach out and see if I can get in touch with her. And there's Mandisa, of course, who's also involved in some things. But
yeah, but she's doing wonderful stuff in that Atlanta area.
Yeah, she's in Georgia. She has a reach across the country.
But right there in LA is Hutchinson.
Hutchinson, yeah, I know Hutchinson's in LA. She is here. I'll reach out to her and see what we can do. I think she's made a talk at one point, and we were talking with her, listening to her talk.
Yeah.
My concern with all of that, it's still not enough, but my concern is that what's the next step? What do we do as Black folks in countries that we're in to raise the level of consciousness to the people around us, to our governments, to the people that are there? All of us aren't as educated as some of us are, and we have to rely on that. And there's still the good old boy network. There's still the racism, basically. Yeah. Is there anything that you suggest or would like to see in place that would help basically combat racism on a level? We've had dozens of kids killed over the last couple of years here for just being in the wrong place at the wrong time, or the right place at the wrong time. How do we address that?
Well, I'd say a few things. One, I'd push against the outcome-driven strategies. Secondly, I'd say we continue to organize, we continue to be vocal, but we recognize that anti-Black racism in the United States is as old as the country. Yeah. It didn't develop overnight, it won't end overnight. I also raised this question. Much of our thinking, even within humanist circles, makes assumptions that I'm uncomfortable with. One assumption is that there is a democracy in the United States that has simply been perverted and we can right it. When it's just as reasonable to argue that in the context of the United States, you can add the UK to this, that anti-Black racism is the system working as intended. Now, how do you struggle against that over against struggling against the system that is just being improperly used? And it seems to me the harder work is to struggle against the system that is operating as intended. And so my push would be to not think in terms of outcomes, what will this activity produce, but rather what are the most creative and sustainable ways for us to say no to this system?
I got the answer.
And be satisfied with that. One must imagine Sisyphus happy.
I mean,
Sorry, hold on a sec, Vanessa. Greg, had you finished? Is that answered your question? Are you okay with that answer? I think we've covered a lot there.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you
I
very
think
much.
we're okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Sorry, Vanessa, do you want to unmute yourself again? Yeah? Okay, thank you.
I mean, I'm going to pretend I jumped in, but I get the whole contents of the whole subject. So I'm going to go with what Anthony says. How can we be creative? I had my child at 18, but guess what? I decided that the buck had to stop with me. So I home educated my children for a start. And that was a challenge. I didn't do it for 2 years. My child was 22 before she flew the nest, and my son is now 19. None of them went to school. And I did that because I didn't want my children to feel like me. Okay. And me is a contents of either being bullied by the certain type of girls or being picked on by a teacher. I'm aware of what I went through. I chose to break the cycle. So I home educated my children. That's one way of not letting the constraints of the past dominate the reflection of the future. Not only did I home educate, I had 5 different jobs, 5 different professions, which led to employment of others. But at the same time, I had to put myself in a place where I felt comfortable as a human. Now, by doing that, I was unaware, like Greg Shields says, I'm the only person there. I get what you mean when you say you go somewhere, you feel all right. I don't know what happened when you realize, oh, I'm the only dark person there. But you know what? There was no racism where I grew up. There was only other kind of things. There were bullying, there was jealousy, there were other things, because I know where I got, let's say, my PTSD from. Do you understand? So we have to be aware of how life is in America, how it was for some of us in Britain, because we may not necessarily have the same depth of struggles because we've allowed, we don't know, it's never happened to us to that severity. So therefore it's allowed us to have a different form of creativity where someone like me can wake up. I'm 44. Remember, I had my child at 18. By the time she was 3, I said, oh, do you know what? Let me just go buy a car, travel the world, and home educate my child. Do you understand? And this is someone who was expelled from a variety of styles of school, you know, but I still, so, you know, we have to be brave to say it's okay to change the circle or change the cycle or break the cycle. It really depends on how much self-education you have as an individual. For a start, and I can overcome racism if I'm not ganged up on. You know, it's quite easy. You have to be comfortable within yourself as a human and be very chuffed at your own personal achievements. That's the best way to put it. If you're chuffed with your achievements, then you can go, racism's not really a situation I want to be in, because we see it, if someone's being racist, that means they're misbehaving badly and they just need minor correction. That, you know, there's a difference between looking at it like that and going, oh, you're whole racist. Do you understand? It's like, it's how you pick and choose an argument and deal with the fight.
Thank you very much, Vanessa.
Britain, yeah, so I just want to say that. And also, coming to that, in Britain, I must say, we may have certain things that bug us, but from where I come from in Britain, our lives always mattered since the 15th century. We had a little whoops in the 60s, but when you look at the 80s to now in Britain, there was more jealousy than racism, because some Black people got far. Is what they did with their success that held, let's say, certain Black women like Audrey and myself back, you know, and that's why I want to just, you know, so there's a different sort of.
Thank you.
I'd have to disagree with that last component. Take a look at the UK scholar Andrews, The New Age of Empire. He suggests something very different. Robert Beckford, who is there, suggests something different. Anthony
But
Reddy.
they're men. They're not women. They're men.
Okay. Well, you said racism, didn't you? You said racism. So I'm responding to the claim that racism, that racism has been handled in the UK.
Thank you. I'm going to move on. Thank you, Vanessa, for your contribution. It's really has been helpful. David, I'm just going to read out. So we've got loads of things happening in the chat. So I've got a question here from Deborah Hinton. Has a question. Please talk about the Christian appeal of redemptive suffering in regard to can humanism ever change or replace this appeal, or can the appeal only be confronted by enormous social change first? So that's Deborah's question.
Yeah, so redemptive suffering is a huge problem for me. I've argued against it, critiqued it for better than 30 years now, but here is the point. The effort of theists to wrestle with this fundamental problem of theodicy, what can you say about God in light of human suffering in the world, is a failed experiment. There is no satisfying answer that can be given. And so the fallback is redemptive suffering. This is nothing that humanists or atheists can change, because theology is a flexible discourse. It shifts and changes to fit the intent. So you cannot make a rational argument that wipes out a theological argument. Reason is supposed to be based on facts. Theology is based on faith. You cannot wipe it out.
Okay, that's I hope that answers your question, Deborah. I'm going to move on to David now. David, if you want to unmute yourself. Sorry, hold on a second. But Deborah, did you want to come back on that? Does that answer your question?
Yes, very much so. Thank you for that.
Okay, Deborah. David, do you want to come in on that?
Yeah, much of the humanism that we take for granted today has a long lineage, especially in pre-colonial times. But at the moment, we are adopting much of the philosophical legacies from the Enlightenment. Do you think that we should, talking to Professor Pinn, do you think that we should reignite the Enlightenment debate that has been going on for the past decade? So we've got people like Jordan B. Peterson, we've got people like Stephen Pinka, that we have, that we've been supporting. But don't you think for the Black community, we need to have an Enlightenment debate of our own? Because you've brought up, or the word existential. I mean, for us, the Atlantic slave trade has been an existential factor that has challenged our existence as a culture and as a people.
Yeah.
Why can't we have an Enlightenment? I mean, the Enlightenment came from challenging the authority of the Catholic Church.
Well, it seems to me there's another approach to this, that what you get, so from my argument and the argument to other humanists like Dr. Sikivu Hutchinson, is that humanism within the context of people of African descent develops as a critique of the Enlightenment. Right, so you get Pinkers and you get others who are developing a mode of humanism that is a uncritical endorsement of the Enlightenment. You get a range of Black thinkers moving back decades who have developed their thought as a critique of the Enlightenment and its assumptions. So that has been happening.
Aren't you worried about the fact that David, I do believe that we can use Marx as a lens to explain how capitalist society has impacted on Black people. Don't you think that's a little bit contrarian? Because I mean, Marx is one of those who
Marx
benefit.
isn't the only alternative, yes? That Marx isn't the only alternative in terms of this sort of critique of capitalism. You could think in terms of the late Manning Marable, how capitalism underdeveloped Africa, right? So there are a variety of approaches here. Think in terms of some of the outstanding thinkers coming out of the Caribbean. There are a variety of ways to get at this. And so from my vantage point, in terms of a critique of enlightenment and a way of rethinking Blackness and Black personhood, right? Rethinking the ontology of Blackness, there are ample resources. We just haven't given attention to them. We've assumed, right? We've assumed that we have to do this by wrestling with Pinka, which gives his approach the normative stance. We can develop this without engaging him.
I don't agree, because at the end of the day, I mean,
But you don't have to agree. I'm simply saying,
but the point is,
there are countless examples of people who have done this, countless examples of scholars who have rethought this, who give us a different way of engaging the Enlightenment.
Yeah, but the point is, I mean, it's led to the overthrow, the near overthrow of the US government. Doesn't that worry you?
What has? No, it has nothing to do with the Enlightenment. What has led to the terrorist attack on the Capitol was Christian nationalism, which doesn't have a thing to do with the Enlightenment.
But it does. I mean, America was born from that. I mean,
it has nothing to do with the Enlightenment. As if anti-Black thought is developed and refined by the Enlightenment. It is not initiated by the Enlightenment. So no, what has taken place in the US, what we see with Donald Trump, doesn't have a thing to do with the Enlightenment. These folks are not that informed. It has to do with a rather crude Christian nationalism, period.
Okay, fair enough. Thanks.
Thank you, David, for that. That was really helpful.
I enjoyed that.
Oh, thanks.
I had fun.
Oh, thanks. Oh, great stuff.
I just don't want people to get the wrong idea. I get loud because I'm having fun. I'm engaged. Right? It's not a bad thing. It's actually a good thing.
Right, then we need you to get louder then. I've got a question here from Nicola. I see you. Just hold on one second. A question here from Steve Clapham. Can you give an example of where Pinka is wrong?
One thing that he's wrong about is the reduction in violence. As if Enlightenment thinking, right, that this movement into modernity has resulted in a decrease in violence. Seems to me he's looking at the wrong people.
Okay. Steve, I know you're out there. Did you want to come back on that? Are you happy with that response, or do you want to take it up? Steve, there he is.
Hello. Thank you for that, Anthony. I've been criticised many times for being too much of a Pinka fan. I agree that he's certainly too Panglosian. His view is too, he sees things through rose-tinted glasses. I've read The Better Angels of Our Nature and his two subsequent books. I find the statistics probably right. I assume that you, Anthony, you've read the book, The Better Angels of Our Nature.
I know his work, I know him, I know his wife. I prefer his wife's thinking.
Yeah, I've read a few of her books as well. But I mean, his main view is that violence has gone down, but there's always going to be enough to fill the news, you know, the news of the day. I'm not explaining it very well at all, but it is a statistical fact that on average, violence has gone down. Right now, we're suffering with what Russia's doing in Ukraine, but in general, violence has gone down. To say otherwise seems perverse.
Well, on this, we will just vehemently disagree. Part because Pinka and I are looking at very different communities, very different histories, that he is making these claims from a certain position of luxury and entitlement that is not mine. And I would also argue that statistics bend to our will.
I'm going to accept, yes, I actually want to agree with that. When you're looking at the different communities and how violence impacts certain people, certain places, certain communities in different ways, then we can think about violence has gone down, but gone down where? And has that had a knock-on effect? Are other places more violent that people aren't really looking at? So I would question that.
And how is one defining violence?
Violence, yeah, exactly. So thank you for that. Thank you, Steve, for coming back in.
Audrey, sorry, can I comment? I just want to quickly say something here in relation to what Steve has said and the response. I think, is the world getting better? Because we cannot I don't think it will be right if we don't acknowledge how far we've come and then know where we are. Knowing how far we've come doesn't mean, and I think the midpoint is knowing how far we've come, that humanity is work in progress, and yes, there is a lot of improvement in certain things, even in women issues, even in racial issues. We cannot dismiss that. However, it doesn't, some people have fought, they have looked into these things, and they have fought for us to be where we are. But where we are is not good enough. It's really not good enough. And what are we going to do in our time? What is the future that we are going to give? What are we going to hand over? And that is where we are. And I have to say something about what Vanessa said about, yes, about we can be educated and we can, about the kind of racism that is in the UK. I have to say what we are doing, what Black people are doing. We have to be resourceful, and we are navigating the system to slowly achieve what we are achieving. I know I will speak personally for myself. I've had to do 3-4 jobs myself, Vanessa, and to educate myself and to educate my daughter as well. I remember when the organization I was working for, Refugee and Migrant Justice, when it shut down, the white lawyers, they got the job first. When we were shut down, we were all made redundant. White people, they got jobs so quickly. And what happened was, those of us, ethnic minorities, especially Black people, we had to look for underground farms to work our way up. We are having to work very hard, and we should work that hard. We should do everything to get to where we want to be. But please, do not say that the UK is now fine for us. It is not. I know what I have to deal with every single day, even in my position, even with my education.
See, it seems to me there's some slippage here. The nation is not the sum of its parts, right? So what is happening on the context of the individual doesn't of necessity tell us what is happening with the nation. Both of those statements can be true, right? So taking it personally, I'm a Harvard educated academic who is doing well. The United States is an anti-Black nation. Both of those statements are true. So it seems to me, my argument would be the world has changed. I don't know if I would equate that to the world getting better. It depends on whose perspective. Is that the perspective of the formerly untouchables in India who still suffer great harm and misery, right? From whose perspective has this gotten better? So again, I would argue, yes, the world has changed, but I don't know if I would equate that to getting better. And I don't know if our individual stories of success really entail national change, right? So in the United States, hell, we had a Black president.
Just gonna say that.
Yeah, but that Black president was followed by Trump. Chew on that.
I was just thinking the same thing, Obama, Trump. It's a kind of, it messes with my mind every single day. I'm going to ask Vanessa and David to put their hands down, just so that just to put their residual hands down, that will be good. And Nicola, please come in. Thank you for being so patient with us.
Fine. What an amazing group of people and the conversations. My goodness. I've got a few points. I hope it's not too long-winded. Dr. Pinn, when you said despised race, you know, that's
Despised color.
Despised color. So I just heard the word despise and it was pinging around my head. But I would certainly say within the UK, the black race is certainly overlooked and not considered in terms of the systems that we have in place, hospitals, education, etc. The organisations, the people I work with, you know, don't have any voice at all. They're refugees to this country and they have no voice. What Greg was saying about what more can be done, when you're a white person, you're not racist and you live in a white area and you don't see racism, it's very easy to imagine that, to think it never happens. You don't see it, you don't feel it every day. Like Lola feels it every day from the moment, well, when she initially wakes up, she's Lola, and then all the labels are put on her, and it's just awful. But I think there are three groups of people. There's the racists, the allies, the actively anti-racist people, and there's a massive group in the middle that don't have the first clue that's going on, don't even understand that, you know, these important conversations need to happen because it doesn't affect their lives. However, I think events like the death of George Floyd and the many people that have died in police custody in this country raises awareness of the ongoing suffering of, you know, people with more melanin in the skin than white people. And with that in mind, I suppose as being a non-racist person, when I had my child 14 years ago, you know, he was first racially abused when he was in my tummy. When I was asked by a colleague, how black do you think your child's going to be? You know, and in light of, you know, what's happened with Harry and Meghan, it's like, you know, I do agree that things are getting worse, even though there are improvements, but I do feel it's getting worse. I set up an organisation called Parents United Against Racism, and I really take my hat off to Vanessa for homeschooling her children, you know, who are all the way through education, because I homeschooled my child for 3 months and it nearly killed me. And then I homeschooled him through the pandemic, bloody awful. But now I know who all Henry VIII's wives are, as if that even matters. Now, recently, I mean, he was first called the N-word when he was 5 at primary school. And that speaks volumes to me because I don't, you know, no one is born racist. It's coming from somewhere, which is the parents. And that's why I called it Parents United Against Racism, with the full knowledge that some parents aren't united against racism, but perpetuate these ideals, toxic ideals in their children's minds. Now, white people are still so clueless about racism. So the latest racist event, my son was asked for the N-word pass, and the head of year 9, in year 9, asked him what that was. And I said to her, it's not my child's job to explain racist slurs and racist language to you. Now, in that school, he goes to the local Catholic school, his choice, not mine. It's all, Jesus is really portrayed as a white man. Now, I I've challenged them on this, like the nativity being, you know, white Jesus and Mary and Joseph, and language and imagery is very important within school. A friend of mine, her child has just recently been called a monkey in content by a member of the teaching staff. It's a very, very diverse school, ethnically diverse school, and there's no imagery of Black and brown children on their walls, only white. Schools can be doing a lot more, but the whole process of a parent going in and complaining about racism, and Vanessa, I'm so glad that you took your children yourself out of all that, is extremely difficult, because over 90% of head teachers are white with no lived experience of racism. So there is a lot of help out there for children that are being racially bullied, but there is nothing out there to support the parents who are making these complaints and getting them swept under the carpet, because white people do not like to talk about racism. It makes them cringe, makes them feel so uncomfortable. It shuts down the conversation, and then nothing ever changes. And just my last point is in terms of white supremacy, I don't know whether anyone's seen the Louis Theroux documentary recently, where he goes to America and speaks to the far right. Looking at that program, it was clear to me that white supremacy is big business. It makes a lot of money, just like the anti-vaxxers, usually white men making a lot of money. And these white supremacists that say the most horrific things are just young, geeky men who've seen a niche, splurt the vial and earn the money. So I think white people need to understand what's going on more, how people are actually suffering and what's happening in terms of the far right ideology. And until white people understand that, especially the white men have this historical and ongoing need to dominate everyone and everything, then I think change will be really slow in coming, because we as a race, as a white race, do not acknowledge our faults. And that's me done. Little soapbox.
Yeah. So it seems to me part of the problem is the assumption on the part of so many whites that neutrality is a possibility. There is no neutrality. And so I think there's a necessary push beyond not being racist to being anti-racist, which is active, right? So I suggest the book, How to Be an Anti-Racist, right? That is a much more active stance that recognizes that neutrality isn't really a possibility, and provides ways to name anti-Black racism and strategies for addressing it. It's a fantastic book.
Thank you for that. I'm going to just read it. JC's got a question in the chat now, and he said he wants to ask, wants to ask the following question, and it's a follow-up for what Lola said and your example about hip hop. In humanist events here in the UK, when music events are put together, you mostly find performers from what could be considered elitist backgrounds, but you don't see music events with popular music like you see in religious events. I recall a conversation with Lola on this. Do you think humanism is culturally disconnected?
No, I don't know that's society. The case. I don't know that that's the case. So for example, there are a good number of hip hop artists who are free thinkers, skeptics, and humanists, right? This is not devoid. Hip hop is not devoid of these sensibilities. So I don't know that's the case. There are visual artists with whom I interact for whom this is their orientation.
I think the question is humanism disconnected from the kind of cultural backgrounds of people that is good. So when they're presenting music, I've been to Humanist UK events, and the music is very, it's music that is very, very white orientated. So there isn't anything, sometimes there's something to do with, like, they'll take a song that is from an African dialect. So they might use something like that. So I'm thinking of the Humanist Choir. So it's all very staid. It isn't anything that I, as a Black person who, you know, raised with reggae music or anything from any other culture, it's very steeped and very based in white elitist cultures. It's classical. It's all of those kinds of things. And
yeah, I think y'all are going to the wrong concerts. I think y'all are going to the wrong concerts because what you're wanting, it seems to me, exists and it's available. Y'all going to the wrong places. You're going to the wrong venues.
Well, I think it's what presented in, if you go to a humanist event and what's presented to you as a humanist event, and how
that's on the that's on the
humanist.
So, but you folks are humanists and you can do it differently. So rather than just pointing the finger at the folks who are doing it wrong, do it differently.
Absolutely, absolutely. Does anyone else have any more questions out there? I'm just gonna. I'm trying not to lose this. Anyone want to hold up? I've got a couple of questions that I. Does anyone want to? Vanessa, you've got your hand up again. Did you just want to come back with a little something? Are we going to be? I'm going to let Vanessa speak, and then I'm going to go to Christopher. Vanessa, can we keep it short? I'm aware of time is speeding on.
Okay, yeah. As we're in the UK, so I'm going to bounce from the UK. I'm just wondering, as Black people from the diaspora who want to be free from all the constraints of the past, why is it we're so afraid of what is different? Because I'm completely different. Even the police has told me, and Boris Johnson is aware of how unique my difference is. And it's only unique because I'm not constrained by Rome and Saudi Arabia, but I'm definitely influenced by Kemet and Stonehenge. So why is it, as Black people in the Western world, are we so frightened of things that are so uniquely different but helpful? Because, you know, the government, you know, I homeschooled my children, I didn't die, but I managed to think of 5 different jobs, do them, create money, and I escaped the whole world of everything that might have affected me. I bounced around it. But there is a good path, and it would help others, you know, it would just help. So I just wonder, as Black people in the diaspora, and including Nicola as well, I'm not leaving you out, you know, why is it we're so frightened of positive differences? Because that's my thing, is that if you was to present something different, like myself, which does work, and then Marcus Garvey approach, if you don't like something, why invest in it and hurt yourself emotionally by accident? There is that sort of thing as well. You know, there is that thing, but we have to examine what that means in a different program story.
Thank you, Vanessa. That's really good. That's a good question. I think that's a very good question.
Yeah, I'm not quite certain I'm understanding. I'm not quite convinced that people of African descent fear difference. I'd also say that for me, there is a strong distinction between what takes place on the level of the individual, and I celebrate and applaud how you have constructed yourself, but there's a distinction between what happens on the level of the individual and systemic wrongdoing. And I don't think, because I don't think systems are simply the sum of their parts, I think resolving the issues is a bit more complex than what takes place on the level of the individual, in part because the benefits of anti-Black racism don't necessarily slap us in the face as such. So if you think in terms of the UK, think in terms of the business industry, think in terms of insurance and the ways in which anti-Black racism in the form of enslavement and the product of enslavement made possible the economic infrastructure off of which the UK and the US still live.
And the rest of Europe.
And the rest of Europe, absolutely. It was a world thing. Yeah. Christopher, I'm going to bring you in now. Do you want to unmute yourself?
Hello, Professor Pinn. I was really fascinated reading your book, and I thoroughly enjoyed the point you made about the difference between theism and religion. And I was kind of awaiting to hear the point of maybe asking actually whether you are suggesting that what is probably lacking in humanism or humanist organizations, let's make it clearly, is that we've not borrowed enough from religious organizations. So if there are a lot of those things that draw people to religion, apart from the belief in God, is it not possible that we as humanist organizations should be trying to copy a lot of those things? The ability to a place for people to unite, cultural connections, networking, and a lot of other things. And if I remember, Alain de Botton wrote a book about religion for atheists. Mm-hmm. And do you think that is the direction that some humanist organizations should be going to yeah, especially ones that are based around attracting ethnic minorities?
Yeah, I mean, I'm less concerned with the vocabulary we use and more concerned with the infrastructure we put in place. So it seems to me humanism has failed to provide a soft place to land, that we are late to the conversation in terms of community formation. We have been slow to really appreciate the affective dimensions of our lives, right? We don't deal well with emotion. We have been reluctant to embrace ritual. So it seems to me, until we wrap our minds around these things and begin to develop ways to harness ritual as a part of our community, we will fall short. And I think even the most theologically dangerous organizations have often been able to thrive because they have done these other things well. They have provided a network. They have provided community. They have provided ways to ritualize life, right? They provided a way to deal with our trauma, with our fears and our concerns. They have dealt not only with how we think ourselves, but how we practice ourselves. And I think humanism, by and large, has fallen short. That we think a simple critique of theism or a critique of anti-science thinking or critique of a lack of engagement of church and state separation is sufficient. No, we live on more than that. And how do humanist communities address the more than that?
Thank you, Christopher, for that question. And it's one of these discussions, a lot of, I know you and Clive will back me up, we've had these discussions about what religion and what Christianity or religion has managed to do is adapt. Wherever it is, it has adapted, and it is, and so it's gone into those places, those dark spaces, where people are needing some comfort and needing that. And I don't think humanism has really stepped up to that. And it feels too much raised into this idea of intellectualism, and too much. There's not less grassroots about it. And we've had these discussions about how do we become more grassroots? How do we get to the woman on the, in the projects or on the housing estates, that those people living in those places, how do we say to them that there is a space for them? And this is a space, because as I think Greg was saying, there are loads of Black people out there. We are all out there who are non-thinkers, but somehow we haven't managed to find the language and the mechanism that actually that we can actually present ourselves as something that people can be involved in or think. Just being able to think about it, whether they become humanists or join ABH isn't a thing, but just to be able to be recognized. And I think there's also something about humanists not wanting to be seen, not wanting to be too loud, not wanting to be too out there. There's something that they need to be quite quiet about the way that they present themselves. So this is quietness. And I don't know if that is just the same if that's just the UK. I kind of put it the stiff upper lip, and this idea of free thinking somehow, you know what I mean? We need to be underground. We need to be low key. Do you know what I mean? A little bit sedate. There isn't anything else is too loud. And, you know, and Black people are loud. We are showy. We are we are shiny. We are, do you know what I mean? We're all of those things. And I sometimes feel that there's a contradiction and a clash culturally in how humanism is presented here and how African people are in general. Vanessa, I see you got your hand up again. Or is that a residual hand, a hand from way back when? Or are we still, you still got your hand up? Okay. Unmute yourself. I'm aware of time. We've got 15 minutes left. Lola, I want to leave it to you after, and Christopher's come back again. So I'm going to have Vanessa, I'm going to have Christopher, and then I'm going to hand over to Lola, and we can wrap up then. I want to thank you. So Vanessa, 2 minutes.
You did say something about how we present ourselves and the language, the medium to reach out. And I actually remember one of the professions I had was alternative events. And I remember I had a poster, which I thought was really cool and And when someone ripped it up and put it on the ground, I understood where that, because of the area I was in, I understood why they did that. But I still had to put the poster up and I still had to be me. And you're right, we are loud. Some of us are underground, some people are underground, but I live up to the other notion. I'm Black, loud and proud. That is something I stand by. Nobody can live near me and expect me to be quiet. So I've earned my right to be the way I am, just through forthrightly continuing without stopping. It is about how do you present the language? How do you say to people, listen, I've lived my life, I've done it. If you want to be constrained by that way, but in the meantime, we've still got to go forward and, you know, keep going and be innovative about how you present yourself. And it is right, it is about how you speak to the people, how you present the language, like what terminologies do you use in this day and age in 2022 to say, look, you can be a pure seed and grow up and be great, you know, whether, you know, and free from the dimensions of the past which constrained us completely. You know, there's a way of saying, right, here's the platform, let's bounce forward with complete new innovations, which has nothing to do with the things that chained us in the past. No matter who chained it, we're just not going to use those chains, you know, and stay in a realm where you've had the freedom emotionally to just be alive. And I do, for some reason, you're right, we are underground, we are proud, we are loud. I am a living example of all what people say about Black people, but there's a flip side. I'm also a positive living example as well, you know, and that's the other flip side, but there should be more.
Thank you for that. Christopher?
I just a follow up from my last question, also the points that Anthony made. I think again, you know, I like the fact that Anthony insisted that instead of pointing fingers at other people and said they are doing it wrong, perhaps the ball is in our court to redefine what humanism is and what it means. Because I mean, we talk about theists and religious people as if they are all the same. You know, we have so many religious denominations. If you go to an African or Nigerian church and see what they do and their interpretation of Christianity, it's totally different from when you come to a church. Really, in fact, in my corner here in London here. So I think we have this license to redefine what the focus of our own humanism should be and how it works for us. Because I don't think it is prescriptive in any way, really, in fact. So I just think it's just for us to just own it and, you know, redefine it and claim it, really. So.
Absolutely, thank you. Yes, I think we need to be really setting out our paths now, really kind of focusing on what it is that we need, what it is that we should be doing, and becoming more active in that. I'm gonna thank everyone for their questions. Thank you everyone for the participation. Thank you for getting Professor Pinn loud. This is what we wanted. This is what we wanted. I'm gonna hand over to Lola for closing remarks. So thank you.
Again, first of all, I'll thank everyone, everyone in the audience. Thank you for your support all the time. Please keep checking us out and supporting our event. And Christopher, you've you've given us a challenge and we have to try it. We have to try this African humanism. We have to define it the way we want. And hopefully we will achieve it. It's hard work. And as Vanessa said, we can't also assume what all Black people want, because we don't know what all Black, we are not all the same either. But we will work hard at defining African humanism. And Professor Pinn, please, we are going to keep in touch with you.
Please do.
Yes, and please let us know when next we are coming to the UK, so that you can be part of this new vibrant African humanism. That is our hope.
I'd be honored.
We want you to be part of it. Thank you so much, everyone. We appreciate your support all the time. And thank you so much for being part of this very, we pushed it to that uncomfortable place. And we hope that we will achieve, we haven't gone to the uncomfortable place for the fun of it, for the sake of it. And we know, we know you, we know our friends, and we know that they appreciate the discomfort that we've had to go through today jointly. So we hope to see you again soon. Thank you so much, Professor Pinn. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Yeah,
Thank
bye. So lovely to see you all again. And Lola, I can't wait to meet you again. I met you once.
Just wanted to say, keep in touch with us on Meetup. We've got loads of events coming up. We've got a big event coming up in, well, September, August. August. We've got a big event coming up in August where we're trying to really establish ourselves as a kind of organization that focuses on humanism for African people. So do follow us on Meetup and look out for our Eventbrite stuff. We are doing big things. Every month we meet the last Saturday of every month between 4 and 6. So see what we're doing. We want all of you to sign up and come to our events. Add your voices to who we are. Okay? Add your voices. We are nothing. The three of us are nothing without you backing us and giving us your thoughts and your views and being part of this community that we are. So good night, everyone, and we'll speak to you all soon.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Brilliant.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you
so
very
much.
much.
Thank you.
Right. Clive, have you got some music to play us out?
Only the same one.
Yeah, we can have it.
All right.
Nice to meet you all.
Thank you. Nice to
Thanks,
meet you.
David.
Great stuff.
Night. Bye, Steve. Thanks for coming. I missed Guy to say goodbye.
Yeah.
Nahir, thank you very much. Thank you for joining us.